Hey guys, Board now back with you, and on this video I will be returning to Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the first time in quite a while. It's been a few months, so hopefully I'm coming back with a bang. This is going to be episode 6 of the second season, and it is Halloween. So pretty notable because it's the first Halloween episode, and this show is quite well known for its Halloween episodes. There's two particularly that sort of stand out. There's this one, and then there's Fear Itself, which is in season 4. There's also a season 6 episode which is Halloween themed, but that doesn't quite leave the lasting impression of the other two. It's a decent enough episode, but it definitely doesn't stand out the way this one does and the way Fear Itself does in season 4. So yeah, Buffy definitely a show that's pretty big on Halloween episodes, which I guess is no surprise. So full spoilers really. I think I've just hinted at this is an episode I enjoy a fair bit. It's kind of one of those cool high concept episodes, and it's just notable for a lot of really great dialogue and some great character moments, which I'll talk about. When I made my notes, I did write down a lot of dialogues, which I probably tend to do anyway in most episodes, but maybe this one more so than many, because it is so much about the characters and the dialogue. So the basic plot, if you're not familiar with the episode, is it's obviously set on Halloween, and the Scoobies are like roped in to like taking kids trick-or-treating by Principal Snyder. They're kind of like, it's their responsibility to look after them and watch them, and that they obviously all get dressed up as Halloween. But there's this new character in town, Rayne, so we have a pretty big debut for a villain. The actor actually died a few years ago now, which is quite sad because he wasn't really that old. But sad to hear. Robin Sachs, I think it is, plays Rayne. So I was sad to hear of his passing at the time. He's actually not in the show as much as you would expect. He's kind of set up here as quite a big villain. I think probably you think of him as a B sort of villain where he pops up every now and again. And he does have a recurring role, but at the same time, it's actually surprising. I think it's 4 episodes he's in over the course of the show. But he does have quite a big history with Giles, which we find out in this episode. So he arrives in town and he's like running this Halloween store, this costume store anyway, I guess as some sort of a front. And we find out that he's actually been hired by Spike and Drusilla. I think Drusilla in particular, because she seems to tell Spike about him. And he does this spell which means that when the Scoobies dress up in their Halloween costumes, they basically become that person. In fact, everyone in town does. Anyone who dresses up as, buys their costume from Ethan's store. And like that distinction does become important later in the episode. But so what happens is Buffy, because she kind of reads up about Angel and his history, they're still in this kind of holding pattern in their relationship where neither one is really sure if they should really take the plunge. Buffy is is kind of wanting it, I think, a little bit more than him, but there's still apprehension about, is this really the right thing? Can this really work out long term? And what we see in this episode is that she's threatened by his history, by the fact that he is a much older man, literally, and that, yeah, he has this very different history as a vampire and what he's been through, and that he has lived, for like centuries. It does, his experiences does put a lot of pressure onto her. So when Buffy and Willow get a look at Giles's like Watcher's diary, they see this particularly like pristine looking princess from like another like century, and Buffy gets it into her head. Well, this is kind of the sort of character, the sort of woman that Angel is really into, and I just can't compete really. But so the only way to compete is to become like this. And so Buffy coincidentally finds the exact same dress in Ethan's store. I mean, that's a bit of a coincidence, and it's the same dress. I guess you could maybe retcon it and say then maybe Ethan knew about this, I don't know how he would actually, but maybe he, yeah, it's a bit of a stretch. Then it's the exact same dress, but I guess you could say maybe Ethan knew. Then maybe somehow he got a look at the Watcher's diet in the past. It is a stretch, but I guess maybe he might have known this is the sort of woman who Angel knew in the past. Or maybe it's something to do with Spike. Maybe he's got spies at the high school, but it is a stretch, but whatever, it works for the episode. So the point I'm getting to is that Buffy buys that dress and dresses up in Halloween. So when the whole thing happens with the costume, she turns into a really helpless sort of princess. So you can see where this episode is going. They're literally flipping the character roles on their head. And I think this is one of the most enjoyable things about Buffy as a show. Like, the episodes that, some of the best episodes are like the ones that really play with the characters and do something, and you get like these standalone episodes that really explores their alternative sides. And I think the episode works so well because it really commits to the premise. So not only is Buffy suddenly helpless because she is suddenly becomes this pristine sort of helpless princess, but she has the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding about modern times. So for example, in one scene she gets freaked out by a car. She thinks she doesn't know what a car is. She thinks it's like some sort of a weapon or a demon, basically. And I do actually like the line where Willow is trying to explain to Xander that, yeah, she thinks it's a demon, she doesn't know what a car is, and I'm a ghost. And he's like, I'm taking a lot of faith here, right? So yeah, to explain, Willow, as for Halloween, dresses up as a ghost. She has a sheet over her head and Boo on the costume, and Xander dresses up as like a commander type man, and as a result he becomes that commander style man. And this is actually a cool example where they do come back to this in a later episode. So this does get brought up again, and it's another good example, I think, of Nicholas Brandon getting to do something a bit different with the Xander character. He gets to explore maybe his tougher, more take charge sort of side, but at the same time, there's kind of a flaw in this. And I'll talk more about the characters and what they kind of do, but what basically happens is that Willow, like, it's weird, she's a ghost, but obviously it doesn't, that's all, so it doesn't actually change her personality, it doesn't change her knowledge in a way, so she's the one who actually takes charge and is the leader. But yeah, it's a really enjoyable episode, it's a good concept. I like Ethan Rayne as a villain. He makes for a good villain. You've got Spike and Drew here. I think that's one thing I'd say is that maybe they don't need to be in the episode as much as they are. I think with Ethan as like the main villain, then yeah, it just feels slightly like overkill and slightly than they're just fighting for the screen. But the whole idea is that Buffy now becomes vulnerable because of this, and she's like exposed to Spike and his gang. So that's kind of the setup for the episode. But it's a very enjoyable episode. As I said, good idea. They really explore it a lot, and there's some great character stuff. So yeah, I'll talk a bit about like particular scenes. I'll like there's a scene at the bronze at the start which is pretty entertaining. So we get Cordy flirting with Angel, and it's always funny like Cordy seeing scenes like this because of course later on when Angel gets his own show, Cordy and him, well, they sort of have a thing, of course, which I'll talk about one day, but yeah, it's just interesting seeing it back here because obviously in this show, Buffy or Angel really only has eyes for Buffy, but this is very entertaining scenes, and again, there's some good banter between Cordy and Buffy. But what I sort of find a bit funny in this scene is then Cordy's going off on one about Devon because she's dating Devon, who's the singer out of Oz's band. Oz, who we've only seen briefly so far, but Dingo's ate my baby, of course. And I like how she's going off on one with Angel about, you know, where the hell is he? Just because he's in a band, it doesn't mean he can like be late for a day. And what I sort of find funny about that is I'm pretty sure Devon's on stage at the time. I'm pretty sure from what I can remember, the song that's being played in the bronze is like a Dingo song. So I'm pretty sure he's on stage at the time. I'm sort of hoping he is because that just makes it sort of like really hilarious. But yeah, some great Cordy scenes in this episode. She actually has one of the best lines. I think it's between her and Willow for the best line, but her line, which I really like later on, is when Buffy and Willow like reveal to Cordy that Angel's a vampire because Cordy's, you know, kind of being bitchy and trying to stake a claim to Angel. And you kind of have this gag where Buffy and Willow are trying to tell her, and she's kind of saying, "Oh God, does he live with his parents or is he married or stuff?" And when they say he's a vampire, she takes a pause, says, "Oh, he's a vampire," and then one of them says, "Yeah, but he's the good kind. He's a good vampire." And Cordy responds with, "Oh, right, like a good vampire, like a Care Bear with fangs, and that's just great. Buffy, Whedon verse dialogue that just hits it right on the head. It's just so brilliant. I absolutely love the line. But what I like about this scene actually is I think a lot of TV shows would kind of drag this sort of thing out, like Cordy and other people finding out Angel's a vampire. But it's actually played as no big deal, and I think there's two reasons for that. I think one is because I think Cordy is just one of these characters that are like so in her own headspace, so obsessed and kind of self-obsessed, and maybe she's so in that way of thinking, then it doesn't register with her, or she's not really that like interested or bothered. And I think the other reason is then it's kind of building this like mythology of Sunnydale as a town where bad things just happen, and where people after a certain point they just start to accept, and there's such things as demons and vampires. And it's something I really like about the show and about the town. So actually, I think although Cordy, she's obviously had no idea Angel was a vampire, I think the fact that then she isn't that surprised, I think is quite sort of fitting. So yeah, it's a really funny scene actually, but it's also well handled because I think for the sake of pacing and stuff and kind of moving forward with more important things, you don't want something like that to be dragged out. It makes sense to actually get it out of the way and dealt with quite quickly. So yeah, some great stuff with Cordy. But yeah, one of the most entertaining scenes, and I think the scene that proves that Alison Hannigan is such a great comedic actress, is the scene early in the episode where Buffy and Willow decide that they're gonna go and like nick the Watchers like diaries to look into Angel and its past. And so what they do is they go into the library. Buffy goes in first, and she starts distracting Giles, talking about like Jenny, and yeah, there's some great comedy with her distracting Giles by saying Miss Canada says you're a babe. She says you're a hot like hunk of something or whatever. And yeah, obviously Giles is then just like hooked in, like hook, line and sinker. But what's great about the whole scene is Willow is obviously sneaking around to get the Watcher's diaries as she's doing this, as Buffy's doing it. So you get this back and forth, and like Willow shooting her expressions. So when she uses like Jenny as a distraction, Willow just gives like this brilliant like disapproval look, and throughout they're just like waving and making hand signals and facial expressions together, and it's just brilliant comedy. It's almost like the art of like silent comedy if you go back to that era, because it just paints a picture just through facial expressions and body language without actually needing words. So, but it's so entertaining, so well done, and I do love. Yeah, it's so in character for Willow, the fact that she would be this disapproving of Buffy, like lying to Giles, and yeah, it's a brilliant scene. I also love the like just the little shot of them like watching through the window, like on the library door. Just that shot, because you've got like these two like black cats sort of like pictures on it. I think because it's a Halloween thing, and just that shot of them is pretty cool. But Yeah, some great comedies. Alison Hannigan really rocks, and I think in many ways this is her big episode, and I think it's her that sort of thematically like comes out of it sort of the strongest, if you like. So there's this thing where Buffy tries to persuade her to really go out and sex it up for Halloween, because she makes this point, and Halloween is the one night where you get to cut loose and be sexy, be daring, what have you. And so she tries to encourage Willow, and at first Willow dresses in this sexy like outfit, and again, great acting from Alison Hannigan, because she's a great looking girl and she does look great in the scene, but she totally sells through like the nervous body language, how uncomfortable Willow is in this. But it's Buffy again trying to encourage her, and it's coming from a good place. It reminds me a bit of that scene in the pilot at the Bronze where she's trying to encourage Willow to seize the day. And this is an episode where it does really sell some of like the cautionary lessons of the series. The fact that it does follow certain like conventions and rules, where if you do certain things, you're likely to end up in trouble. So obviously, going back to that pilot, Willow did seize the day and she almost got killed by a vampire. And there's a similar sort of cautionary lesson here, but what's notable is if you contrast Willow and Buffy in this episode. So Willow decides to go, is just too nervous and decides to go against Buffy's judgment, and she actually puts the sheet over, so she looks like a ghost. And she comes down the stairs because Buffy thinks she's coming out as the the sexy Willow, and so she goes to answer the door. Sanders obviously arrived, and Buffy says, "Wait until you get a load of." Willow comes down the stairs. Casper. So there you go, great pop culture reference there. But yeah, if you think of Willow and Buffy in this episode, Willow actually ends up by becoming the leader, becoming the safe and smart one, because she actually resists being sexy, being different, that sort of thing. Because assumably if she hadn't have put the sheet on and just been the ghost, then I don't know what she would have become, but possibly she wouldn't have been as effective. But whatever the case, I think the metaphor certainly works. But if you contrast that with what happens with Buffy, because of her desire to be more like the perception of what Angel actually wants in a woman, she actually puts herself in danger and almost gets killed at the hand of Spike and his gang. So it's a cautionary lesson for Buffy, and I think what it also maybe shows them, Willow is like the more sensitive sensible of the two. She is the more forward-thinking, progressive liberal. I think there's certainly an element of Buffy coming from a slightly more like middle upper class conservative type background, and she's certainly very like forward thinking in that. But I think that's a very interesting thing for them to be doing, actually having like Willow as a support. I mean, she's in the main cast, but obviously Buffy's like the star of the show. But to have Willow actually be the one who is more progressive, more liberal. So, because actually in the scene where Buffy is talking about dressing up as the princess, and talking about what these princesses had all these years ago, Willow says, yeah, but I would still take, you know, the right to vote over it. So I think that really shows Willow's like progressive, intelligent, sort of liberal sort of attitude to these things. And I have seen, you know, someone criticise this episode online saying, oh, you know, Buffy's obsessed with the dress and looking good. And I get that as a critique, but I think what they are doing is they are making it into a cautionary lesson where by the end of the episode, she learns then, you know, looking good, being glamorous isn't the be all and end all. Because not only does she learn it through what happens in the episode, but she learns it from Angel, because Angel says then, you know, he just found those sorts of girls boring. Then Buffy's the girl for him, you know, she's like everything for him. So the episode does make it clear that then, yeah, Buffy was wrong about that. And I think it's interesting that Willow, as I said, seems to be the more progressive one, and she does take charge. She is the leader. It's like a great episode for Willow, and I think also it's worth noting, just to complete that sort of arc in the episode, then Willow later in the episode, like after the whole thing has been reversed and things have gone back to normal, she like tosses it off the sheet and just walks around town how she was before, and Oz comes back in, or he drives by in the classic Scooby-Doo style van which he has throughout the show, and again, a bit like in the Inca mummy girl, he just lays eyes on Willow and he's like, who is this girl? And there's actually this great thing with them where they keep bumping into each other or like being in the same place, but not. She doesn't actually like notice him until later. And there's a good example actually, because she's dressed as a ghost under the sheet. Like in the school at one point they bump into each other, and obviously he doesn't know it's her, so that's a thing. But the point I'm making is, I think without actually trying, at the end she catches Oz's eye. It's like, it's almost because she's not trying too hard, and that's kind of what impresses Oz. It's like her casual sort of sex appeal. So that kind of brings it full circle, where it's saying if you try too hard, if you're too obvious, there's negative like results, but actually if you just be yourself, then it is much more ideal. You're gonna have the desired effect, I guess. So yeah, I think there's quite a cool arc. So it does some great stuff with the characters. And actually the Willow line I really love in the episode is when she says about Buffy, she couldn't have dressed as Xena. so that's great stuff. But yeah, we find out actually then Giles knows Ethan. They have a past, although they don't really get into that till a later episode. But he actually, once he lays eyes on it, some great acting from Anthony Stewart Head, because he just sells the whole thing and the threat, and that this is essentially a very devious, dangerous character. Because him and Willow go to like the costume shop, and as soon as he sees Ethan, Giles is like, get out of here, basically. And this is where we first hear the line Ripper, or the name Ripper, as referring to Giles, and Ethan calls him it. And so the whole sort of like, as I said, the whole sort of thing is then it's the people who got their costumes at Ethan, because when the Scoobies bump into Cordelia, she's got this very, I have to say, very sexy cap like, well, not Catwoman, but cat outfit. But she doesn't change. She doesn't change into a cat. And Willow mentions this to Giles, says she got her outfit from a different store. I think it's Party Town or something like that. And that's where they tweet. Then it's obviously the people who brought theirs at Ethan's. And they kind of, well, let's go to the source. So that's when they go to the shop. And we see Ripper come out, essentially, because Giles, it sort of cuts back and forth, and I guess this is just network TV in the 90s, really, not really being willing to show a lot of violence, but the effect is then we're meant to think that Giles is like beating him to like this bloody sort of pulp, or just tortured him to finally get him to give him the answer how to break the spell. So we see a couple of him hitting him with his knee, and I think again the important thing is how Anthony Stewart Head just sells it so well, like just the rage in his eyes. He just becomes this animalistic Ripper type character, and eventually he persuades Ethan, or he like forces Ethan to tell him, and that's it, they break the spell. And it's this is one great example of what this sort of episode does. It's this brilliant Monster of the Week standalone episode, which has like a beginning, middle and end, and it wraps itself up in a beautifully like convincing way, because we get the old Buffy back, and so she's vulnerable to Spike, and she suddenly sits up almost like a wrestler and says, "Hey honey, I'm home," and starts kicking his ass basically. So great line for Buffy. I think that's sort of up there for one of her best. So some great stuff throughout the episodes, some great lines. And the ending's actually really cool, because Giles goes back to the shop, Ethan's shop, to kind of like run him out of town or make sure he's not around or something. And it turns out he's already gone, and he leaves basically like this like message for him on like a tag, and it says, "I'll be seeing you very soon," or soon. So that's the final shot, and it cuts back up to Giles, and he's got that very intense like Ripper type look. So it's a great hook actually for advancing Giles' character and getting into the past, but also we're going to find out more about Ethan in future episode. But it's a nice little hook for Ethan as a villain, because he kind of they overdo him, that they kind of survive, but Ethan is still out there and he will return. So cool little ending. And that's pretty much the episode. I think it's a really strong episode. As I said, I think maybe Spike wasn't needed, or maybe they could have cut down his role, but that's a small complaint. It's very enjoyable. Some great writing, some great character stuff. A really good Willow episode, as I said. So there you have it. It's Halloween, and I'm going to give it a rating, and I'll give it 8 out of 10. So that's my rating for Halloween. And I think it's sort of worth saying, when I think about the Buffy list of episodes and the rankings, is then it's challenging for the top spot, because I think up to now in the show, I think it's definitely one of the best episodes. I think it's a credit to the show and how many good episodes it has, then actually, when it's all said and done, I don't think this will be that near to the top. My guess is it'll be about the middle, maybe a bit higher. It's a good episode, but I think it's credit to the quality of the show overall. Then there are actually quite a few better episodes. So when I look at the top of the list, it's definitely between this and I think School Hard for number 1. I think they are the two best episodes so far. And I think I'll give it to School Hard. I think it's #1 at the moment, and I think it's just about staying there. I think the reason is because Spike makes such a good debut in that episode, and also it's just a bit more of a meaty episode, has a bit more of a style and edge to it. I really like the kind of horror element you get, like the stuff in the high school. So overall, I think it's just a bit more of a high standard of episode, but there's not too much in it. So Halloween will go in #2 on the list, just behind School Hard. And there you have it. That's my review of Halloween. That's the 6th episode of the 2nd season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Sorry it's taken so long doing another Buffy review, but I think something tells me in recent months, or the coming months I should say, I think I'll have plenty of time to do more of these and get back into the groove. So coming up next time, it's another meaty episode actually. It's Lie to Me. So that's episode 7 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 2. If you want to catch up with that and prepare for me to review it, then yeah, do that and comment below, like and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of this episode. You can contact me on Twitter. I'll put the link in the description, and I'll also put the rankings for the Buffy episodes in the description below as well. But thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more Buffy reviews soon. Goodbye.